everybody. Welcome back. This is Doc Talks News and Views, the podcast of the Northborough Free Library. And I'm Deborah.
And I'm Katrina.
And today we have a very special guest. We have the chairman of the Northborough Trails Committee here with us today. And today we are going to talk all about the Northborough Trails. So our guest is Bob
Mihalik.
Bob Mihalik. Welcome, Bob. So Bob is here today. And the trails organization in town, I think, is a little bit different than some trails organizations in other communities. Can you tell us, please, how the Trails Committee works in our community? Aren't you an official, like, town government of some kind? I would like to share about how you came into being.
So, a little bit of the history of the Trails Committee. Some longtime residents of Northborough who grew up here in the 1930s, 1940s, into the 50s when it was a much more agricultural town, a lot more farms. They used to have paths that they would walk on through woods that would connect one farm to another. And over the years, some of these farms turned into neighborhoods and things like that. But the old-timers, they knew where these paths were, and they continued to use them. And it got to a point, I think, into the late 80s and in through the 90s where they started, as they were getting older, they realized that, you know what, we should really have something in the town where we let other people know about these paths, how to get maybe from the high school to the aqueduct or, you know, something like that. So they approached the town. I'm not sure who, it may have been Kathy Joubert, actually, at that point, the town planner, may have been involved in the early formation of the Trails Committee. But the idea was, you know, let's get some sort of infrastructure. And the internet was kind of getting going now. And they were like, you know, we can draw some maps. We can put some things on a website that people could access. So that was sort of the logical basis for the formation of the committee. And then they said, well, how are we going to manage this? What umbrella are we going to fit you under? And Northborough has an open space committee. And open space manages the ball fields. I think they now have some control over the new town common, which is beautiful, by the way. I was just there a couple of days ago. They did a great job on that. And some other things, too, I think, are involved that the open space committee controls. And they said, well, why don't we just make a trails subcommittee under the umbrella of the open space committee? And so that's what happened. And so we are an official town committee, but more accurately, we're a subcommittee of open space. And so that's basically where we get our guidance from. So, for example, if we want to make a new trail, we would run that idea by the open space committee and probably Conservation Commission as well, just to make sure we're not stepping on anyone's toes from a conservation perspective. And that's really, you know, a synopsis of the history and sort of how we operate within the town.
That is pretty exciting. I never realized that our trails were original footpaths through the town. I think that's fabulous that the committee preserves them. So you're part of open space, which obviously makes a lot of sense because when you walk through a trail, it is open space and it's available to the whole community. How many trails do you manage at this point? How many trails are in?
So the total mileage is about 40 miles of trails. So they're not all contiguous, though. We do have some sections, for example, on West Main Street heading into Shrewsbury. A little bit before the Ward Hill ski area, we have a nice little trail there. It's a 1-mile loop. We call it the Jubilee Trail. That's one of the shorter ones. Then you get into areas like Mount Pisgah or the Crane Swamp area. Those have 15, maybe 20 miles of trails. And most of the connectivity of the trails is one of our big projects that we always try to work on. For example, if a parcel of land is available, and this is where we just get such great support from the town, is they know where the trails are, and if a parcel becomes available that could possibly lead a connection between two of our existing trail networks, they'll alert us to that, and they'll say, you know, are you interested? If the town may have first right of refusal on some of these properties, and so if we could acquire that, then we may be able to connect, like, say, a 4-mile trail network with a 16-mile trail network and have some bigger kind of superstructure trail where people could make almost a whole day out of it. So, but yeah, scattered all through the town. Number of separate areas, maybe 10 or 12. I've kind of lost track by now.
I think that's a lot of opportunity, Katrina. How about you?
That is. It sounds like it takes a lot of effort to maintain the trails. Who does that? How do you do that? And if somebody was interested in volunteering to help, how would they go about that?
So we are, as you said, an all-volunteer organization, so none of us get paid to do the maintenance. For the most part, and I think it's part of the history of the trails too, they were kind of, the paths were worn in when the kids used to work on farms in the 30s and 40s, and they go through forests, and as long as people keep walking on them, they will, the vegetation won't grow, and they kind of self-maintain, at least the footpath part of the trail. What we don't really have control over is, does a rotted tree limb fall down over it and maybe block access? We've had some ice storms, 2009 or 8 comes to mind, where down here in the middle of town we got rain, and it was like 34 degrees, but up at Mount Pisgah, which is a few hundred feet higher in elevation, they got ice. And there was probably 300 trees that came down up at Mount Pisgah. So, as I said, we were all volunteers. We had a list of names of who's capable of, say, running chainsaws on the trail. And we had 35 or 40 people up there. And in one weekend, we opened it back up after that 08 or 09 ice storm. So from a volunteering perspective, really anyone is allowed to volunteer and become a member. And I'm doing air quotes around the word member, because we're kind of a loose-knit organization. We've had some people show up. We have a meeting typically the third Monday of every month. We'll have a meeting. It was virtual last year because of COVID. We're back live now. So we just met last night at the conference room at the Northborough Police Station. Anyone can show up, 7 o'clock, and the schedule's listed on the website. It is an official town meeting, so we have to post an agenda, and the dates and times of each meeting are listed on the agenda. But yeah, anybody can show up, and we've had people pop in, even for one meeting, just to voice a concern, whether it's, a violation of a leash law or a tree down on a trail, or maybe an idea for a new trail. People pop in from one meeting, and then that's it. And then we've had longtime members. I actually moved to town in the year 2000, and then in 2001, I went to Applefest, and some of the old timers who got the trail committee going, Art Cole, Rick Leaf, I'm going to forget a few of the names, but they were sitting at a table at Applefest, and they had a sign-up sheet, and I looked at it and was like, wow, we have trails in town? Sign me up. So I signed up in 2001, and I've been active ever since.
That's amazing.
That sounds really fun, and I like the idea that anybody can come to a meeting or join for a special project, or like you, come, stay, love it, and be with us forever. I think it's really exciting that we have so many trails here in town. I've enjoyed a few of them myself. But can you tell me so I've done them myself, as an adult, but what if I was bringing a family with maybe small children? Which trail would you recommend for children?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it sort of blends into this idea of the Americans with Disabilities Act, because we've been asked about that as far as accessible trails for wheeled vehicles, not just wheelchairs, but strollers and things like that. Just as a side note, mountain bikes are allowed on all the trails, which is unique. Some towns don't do that. We do that because the trail tread itself is very durable in town here. There's a few areas that get muddy, especially with the amount of rain we had in July of this year. But for the most part, the mountain bikes don't cause any more damage to the trail than somebody, say, pushing a stroller or jogging or something. So we let mountain bikes on all the trails. But mountain bikers tend to be, a pretty wide variety. Some of them want to go to Mount Pisgah, where there's like almost sheer rock drop-offs. And other people want to ride, say, on the Aqueduct, which is a nice, very gentle slope grass. So from a woodsy type experience, I'm trying to think of what a good family trail would be for the woods. I would say the first part of the up on Smith Road at Mount Pisgah. There's a fairly big parking area. Typically on a weekend, there could be 30 cars there parked all along the road and stuff. We're working on that to see if we can expand that parking. That was, if there's ever a silver lining for COVID, trails popularity is it. It's just went through the roof last year. There was cars parked everywhere at all the trailheads because people wanted to get out. So the first maybe couple miles up at Mount Pisgah, it's a little bit rocky, but it's wide, it's flat, it's hard packed, and you're in the woods. So there's beautiful pine and hardwoods that you can walk through. It smells great. It gets a little gnarly as you get farther in there, but you don't have to. You can just go and do like a nice loop, and then you're back in the parking lot. So that's a good woods hike for a family. A nice just out in the open kind of hike is the Aqueduct. So Massachusetts Water Resources Authority realized that once they put this new aqueduct in, which they drilled a tunnel like 200 feet deep under the existing aqueduct. So the existing aqueduct is actually just an emergency backup. And I think what they realized, maybe from a public relations perspective, is why don't we open it? Used to have no trespassing signs everywhere. They said, why don't we open this up to recreational use, non-motorized? So, you can't go tearing up and down it on snowmobiles or dirt bikes, which people have asked about because it looks really tempting. Having ridden snowmobiles, I'd like to go on a snowmobile on that thing. But yeah, I can't do it. But it almost looks like a converted railroad bed. If you're up on there, it's in some spots 15, 20 feet wide. It's all grass, very gentle slope to it. Now, you're not in the forest. There's not trees hanging over. It's a little bit hot sometimes when the sun is shining, but it's a really nice walk. We have a big project, sort of a longer-term Trails Committee project of the famous Stone Arch Bridge that goes over Hudson Street. That is the aqueduct. The aqueduct pipes used to run through there. It's been decommissioned. Northborough basically has determined that if we have what's called not ownership, but they call it care and control, so we can have a trail run across there. And so one of the plans is that's sort of like the final missing link of this 4.2-mile aqueduct, which goes from Marlboro all the way up past the back of Algonquin High School, right through the middle of town, past the police station, over the Stone Arch Bridge, by Edmund Hill Woods, across Barefoot Road, and then all the way up into Berlin. Wow. So it's amazing. It's a huge gift from MWRA. They're going to continue to mow it, which is a godsend because our little mower is not going to do a 4.2-mile long trail that's 15 feet wide. So they have big tractors, and it's still they still want to. It's an emergency backup aqueduct. So in case something goes wrong with the deeper aqueduct, they don't want vegetation and tree roots and stuff growing into this thing over the next couple decades. So they're going to keep mowing it. And but then so we have access to that, and you could literally connect one of our biggest hiking areas, which is the Cedar Hill Crane Swamp area, which is I think 2,300 acres. You could go through there, go all the way up the aqueduct to the northern part of Northborough where Mount Pisgah is. And like I was mentioning a few minutes ago about connectivity, like this is is panacea the right word? I don't know if that's the right word, but this is it for connectivity. Like the entire eastern portion of Northborough, we can connect by trail, go under Route 20 right by the police station and all the way up. And then the idea behind the Stone Arch Bridge is we have to put a new surface on it and some fencing. But one of the longer term things we'd like to do is, and a few other towns have this, it's called a Bridge of Flowers. Mm-hmm. So basically maybe get the garden club involved in it and stuff, but not just have a pressure treated boardwalk go across it, but then also have plantings. So when you're driving on Hudson Street and you look up and you'll see, all these beautiful flowers and things like that. So it's in the works. It's taken many years to get to this point, but we're getting close now to start getting some bids on things. Like there are some utility wires that are a little bit too close to the surface, so those are going to. It's not NSTAR anymore. I forget who they're called. The utility company. Yeah, Eversource. Yeah, they're going to bury those lines for us, but not for free. Mm-hmm. So we have to write a grant, and I can talk about that a little bit later about the funding for this kind of stuff. But it's going to be a big project. It may end up costing close to $500,000 just to get across that 417-foot long bridge, but it'll be definitely worth it.
It'll be a focal point of our community. I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, for sure.
And I am a member of the Garden Club, so I cannot speak for the whole club, but somebody from the Trails Committee or maybe Conservation approached us about that several years ago, and we're excited. But I have to say, we should find a way to get the water from the river up through the bridge, because that will be the big thing, is making, if we do any plantings, is making sure that we have a really well accessible water source.
I was thinking about that, and I think a couple well-placed solar panels with some electric pumps, and we're good to go.
Exactly. I don't know if you've visited Massachusetts' famous Bridge of Flowers out in Sherborne, but
Haven't been there yet. I want.
when you see it, you will be so inspired.
It'll be a research trip to there. I want to go to the Waban Arches. I think is another one, which is on the crosses the Charles River, but farther in towards Boston. And I think there's even a third hiking bridge over the Charles, again in one of the more local suburbs to Boston.
The Bridge of Flowers in Sherborne is not really connected to other trails. I mean, that's just an old railroad bridge that they've maintained as a flower garden.
Oh, okay.
But I think incorporating that, it's just a whole nother level of, open space or nature for people in our community to access as part of a trail. That's just fabulous, Bob. And I'm glad that there's some movement on that.
Yep.
That would be my favorite trail when that gets done. But do you have a favorite trail?
I really, really like Edmund Hill Woods. There's two access points to it. One is on Rice Avenue, which is sort of right a little bit north of the Stone Arch Bridge that goes over Hudson Street. So the Rice Ave parking lot. But then the backside of Edmund Hill Woods is where the Northborough Senior Center is. Tons of parking there. You'll never run out of parking spots at the Senior Center. And it's just beautiful, beautiful trails, amazing topography. So it's actually, Edmund Hill Woods is a glacial moraine, I think it's called. So it's essentially a big pile of rock that when the glaciers melted and retreated, when the glaciers came down from Canada, it was like a big bulldozer just pushing huge piles of rock. So Long Island, Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, that was the southern extent of how far the glaciers came down. And then when they started to melt, those islands essentially were formed. And Edmund Hill Woods is part of that same sort of process. It was basically a big pile of rock that was getting pushed down by glaciers. And then when the glaciers melted, we've got it. So there's kettle ponds there, which are a glacial feature. There's these huge, big round boulders, glacial erratics, they call them. Those are there, and you can even see evidence on some of them of how over the past, several thousand years they've slid down the hill a little bit, because you can see a pile of rubble on the downhill side of some of these big boulders. One of our volunteers, his name is Forrest Lyford. It's a great name, right, for a trails person. Forrest is a fabulous guy, incredibly knowledgeable, and he is a retired geologist. And we'll have some of these at Applefest coming up. We have an entire pamphlet on all of the diverse, cool things that Edmund Hill Woods has. So it's just there's record-setting eastern white pine trees there. There's I think it's the state champion cucumber magnolia tree that a friend of mine and I climbed using not like spikes, but tree climbing equipment where we don't damage the tree. We climbed that and measured it, and it's a state champion. It's the biggest cucumber magnolia in the state.
Wow.
Is there. So, just fascinating, really fascinating stuff there.
That's awesome.
Actually, you mentioned something when we first started talking about you coming on to this podcast about the Edmonds Wood. The Edmonds Wood Trail is an interpretive trail?
Yes.
Okay, so tell us a little bit more about that. This sounds like a very multi-dimensional trail.
So this again, the entire, I don't want to say entire, a large part of the credit goes to Forrest Lyford, but also one of our volunteers, Cheryl Devine, worked with Forest, and basically, if you park at the Rice Avenue parking lot, and you just have to walk in maybe 15 or 20 feet, and you look down, you'll see a maybe 2-foot tall brown 4x4 post, and it has the number 1 carved into the top of it. So that's the first station. And then the library, and I think they're still here, but I don't know if too many people use MP3 players anymore.
No.
So when they first did this, it was probably in the early 2000s, and everyone had MP3 players. And you could borrow a backpack that had binoculars and the MP3 player, maybe some bug spray in it. And then you could go to Edmund Hill and you put the headphones in and you hit play, and then you go to station 1, and it will say, you know, this is a transition forest that was an open meadow. And then it's transitioning into pine trees, but now, you know, hardwoods are starting to grow. And then, so that's that, you know, maybe 30 seconds. And then you go to station 2, and maybe it's one of these big boulders. And Forrest would describe why this is here, where it came from, why it looks the way it looks, because the glacier pushed it and rounded it off, you know, that kind of stuff. And I think there's 26 of those stations.
Okay. Well, we still have the backpacks and the walking sticks that come with it. I think everything except the recording equipment. Do you have plans to, can we just scan something with our smartphone now? How do we?
So that's where
get...
Cheryl Devine comes in, and I think with her son or daughter, I forget the family involvement there. But yes, so that's exactly what they're doing. So you can scan a QR code. And I don't know if it's for each station or if it's just you scan it once and it pulls up a website, and then you can, you know, tap the number 1 and then hear the description for what station number 1 is describing.
And is that available now, Bob? Do you know? Or
I don't know for sure.
Coming soon.
It may be. I'd give it a 50-50 right now, but I can find out. Neither Cheryl nor Forrest were able to make it to the meeting last night,
Okay.
so I don't have an update on that. But I'll know by Applefest for sure. And also, though, at Applefest, we have a booklet that Mia McDonald, the conservation officer for the town, she printed up this nice hard copy booklet. And it basically accomplishes the same thing, but you can hold it in your hand and you can bring it home. And I saw it for the first time in our meeting last night, and I was like, I have to read this thing. So I didn't get a chance to read it yet, but it has all the detail. Like, there's a man-made pond there. I didn't even know that until yesterday.
Yeah.
But when they
I
built,
knew about the man-made
they
pond.
built one of the neighborhoods there, and they basically, when they were excavating for the foundations, they piled it up, and I don't know if it filled with water on its own or how it formed, but yeah, there's this man-made pond there. So yeah, it's a great little, and it's 47 acres. It's not all that big compared to Pisgah or the Cedar Hill area, which are thousands of acres. Here's this little 47-acre thing surrounded by neighborhoods and the senior center and train tracks on one side. But there's just so much there. It's just such a, you know, after work to do like a quick little walk there is just, you know, it's pretty cool.
Oh, that does sound like a really exciting place to go. And I will reach out to Mia and see if we can get a couple of those booklets to include in our backpacks, because those
sure.
are still available, folks, to get from the library. So if you want to go out on any of our trails, just come to the library first and grab a backpack that will have everything that you'll need to enjoy any trail, and including that interpretive guide for Edmonds. So the Edmonds Woods. I don't know why I'm struggling with that. Edmonds Woods. Apparently, Edmund either made the trail or had his farm there.
I think you have to put the word hill in there. Edmund Hill Woods.
Edmonds Hill Woods. Did I got that right?
You'll get it done.
Yeah. Anyway, there's a lot of really beautiful trails in town. Did we want to talk about like some of the other trails that are maybe not part of the Northborough Trails? I know that we have tons of them. Somehow or another, we're connected with the Burroughs Loop, for example.
Yes.
How does that factor in Northborough Trails and the Burroughs Loop?
So that's one of the coolest things that's happened in the past couple of years. So that is a 33 or 34 mile loop that connects Northborough, Marlborough, Southborough, and Westborough.
Wow.
And
that's a lot of miles.
Yes. The Marlborough section was the most difficult to complete, and I think some of it still they're looking at purchasing parcels that may allow some better connectivity, because I think some parts of it go on sidewalks and things like that, but that's not horrible. If you're walking 10 or 15 miles in the woods, a mile on a sidewalk or something like that isn't going to be too bad. And I think everyone would know, just if you've driven through Marlboro, it's much more developed than the other three boroughs. But yeah, that came about. I think the conservation officer in Marlboro I think her name is Patricia Settles, I think is her name. And this was really one of her ideas, or maybe solely her idea of, let's do this. Southborough, Westborough, Northborough had quite a bit of trail, and some of our trails go right up to Boundary Street, which is literally the boundary between Northborough and Marlborough. And there's a nice reservoir right on the Marlborough side of Boundary Street, and a lot of wooded areas. So they started looking to see how could they connect. And, other than some of these exceptions where you have to go on a sidewalk, it's pretty much you're walking through fields and forests for 33 miles. The Northborough part was super easy because all of our trails existed already. It was just a matter of putting proper signage on them so people wouldn't get lost. So, and Mia McDonald did a lot of that in Northborough. There's these nice little blue placards. They're maybe 3 by 5 inches. They have arrows pointing which way to go. And essentially you come out of the Cedar Hill Trail area. You walk north up the Aqueduct. You go behind Algonquin High School, cross over Route 20, through what's called the Old Farm Trail. There's a little bit of that history, right? What are we going to call this trail? Well, there was an old farm here. Call it the Old Farm Trail. And then you cross over Boundary Street, and then you go into Marlborough. And because it was a bigger project, there may have been state funding. I'm not 100% sure about that. But there were some wet areas in Marlborough where they put in these really cool, it's called a helical pier boardwalk. So it's essentially a large metal screw that gets driven into the ground. It's maybe 6 feet tall and like 2 inches in diameter. And they have this way of driving this thing into the ground, and then they mount brackets on it and then put pressure-treated lumber. So there's this cool helical pier boardwalk that goes, and it's literally right on the other side of Boundary Street, the Northborough-Marlborough town line. And that sort of technology, I think they're going to employ in some of the other areas, because really the way the trails have ended up is they're in areas that are difficult to build houses. It's either rocky, like Edmund Hill Woods, it's a glacial moraine, can't really put houses on there, or it's wetland, and you can't develop that either. So I'm not trying to say like we've got the dregs. I think we have the jewels, actually. We've got the best stuff. The flat land where it's easy to build houses, okay. It's not that it's bad hiking, but it's, I'd rather be like at Mount Pisgah where you have some elevation change and some rock features and things like that. So, developers might look at it like, oh, we don't want that land. And then Trails is like, we want that land. So, it's like the best of both worlds. But, so a lot of the areas, especially like some of these places in Marlborough, which is much more developed than Northborough, they just can't build on. But if it's wet, how do you hike through it? And so that's where some of this technology came through with these helical piers. And, they had union carpenters working on the project and stuff like that were getting paid. I was a little bit jealous. I'm like, hey, we're all volunteers over here. But it was a much bigger project. You couldn't do a project like that with volunteers. It would take way too long to you need someone there 40 hours a week. They had a couple guys there, doing that pier project. And, to get it done in a reasonable time frame. I think a project that scale, you need some dedicated paid labor to get that done. But one of the things that we'll have at Applefest, and I don't know if it's on our town website yet, and I saw it last night for the first time, very detailed maps of the Burroughs Loop Trail. So we're going to have packets of maps printed up. Try to refer people to the website just to save paper, so we're not... I don't mind paper copies, but I often wonder how many of them just end up in the recycling bin. But a lot of people like it. They like to hike with paper copies, and they bring it with them, and they take notes on it and things like that. So we'll accommodate that, but we'll also have some small business cards that we'll hand out at the booth at Applefest. So it'll have a QR code that'll link people directly to our website. But I was looking at these maps at our meeting last night for the first time, and they're just amazing. And I have yet to ask Mia, like, where'd you get these from? Because I've never seen them before. But yeah, they're great. They're nice maps.
Well, again, I guess that's another thing I'll have to ask Mia to have, here at the library for reference too. Because like you said, sometimes people come in and they just want to take a look at it before they actually go out. But it's nice to know that there'll be the QRC code so that people can access the maps like right on their phone while they're walking. So if anybody wanted to, like, if they just listen to this podcast and now they want to go out and hike, so we would go right to the Northborough Trails Committee website, and that's part of the town.
Yep.
So how would someone find it when they...
If you go on the town website, I think there is a drop-down menu of committees, and we're in that drop-down menu. And if we're not individually listed, and I haven't looked, they had to migrate the server about a year ago or something like that. So if we're not directly listed, we would be under open space. They would, since we're a subcommittee of the Open Space Committee. But I think we're actually listed. I think Trails is listed separately. And so you can click on that link, and then anyone who does that, they might see a difference in some of the maps. And one of the reasons for that difference is we also partner with Sudbury Valley trustees on both Mount Pisgah and Crane Swamp. And they have SVT, Sudbury Valley Trustees, has very, very nice mapping software for trails. They can put layers on it and distances, and they update it very regularly. And so what we've done is we've linked the maps on our website to the SVT maps, and that just saves, I think it's David Kane is one of our GIS guy. It saves him the effort of having to do it. If somebody makes a new trail, we don't have to bother him because SVT is just going to update it, and then that'll update our website.
Perfect.
That is perfect. That's great. So all everybody needs to do really is just bring their cell phone, or they could download a PDF beforehand, like as you mentioned.
Absolutely.
People like to take notes. So that's all there. And once upon a time, the Trails Committee did make their own book about the trails, and I think that was back again in maybe the mid-aughts or early aughts.
I think so.
We still have that in the collection, folks, so if you want to come and check that out, and, it's a printout of all the trails that existed at that time, and little maps in there as well. So that's another way you can get to know about the trails before you actually walk the trails, but that's probably the best thing, right, is to just go out and hike the trails.
Yeah, and just, one word of caution is in some of these more rural areas of where the trails are, don't count on having good cell signal. So that's, I think, where the paper copies, or at least some familiarity with where you are and maybe what some of the roads are. We're not super rural that you're gonna go for 50 miles and not hit a road. If you're lost, you most likely will come out onto a road at some point. But you don't want to leave things that much up to chance. I think it's always good in general to know where you are. And if you're going somewhere, maybe tell your spouse or your kids or something. Like when I go mountain biking, I usually tell my wife and daughters, like, I'm going on the Stirrup Brook Trail, sort of the implicit message there. If I don't come back, that's where to go look for me.
Start looking
right.
there.
But yeah, and then there's a few other very, very popular applications on smartphones. Trail Forks is one, All Trails is another, and Strava. So those three apps, they're good and bad in the sense that they're very accessible. They have a lot of detail to them, but some of the stuff on those are when somebody, say, mistakenly goes into private property. It'll show up because it's just a GPS. It just drops the GPS popcorn. And so if you happen to go across private property and someone's looking at Strava and they're like, oh, that looks like a neat trail, I'm going to go on that. Now you've got a second person going onto private property. And then that's how those apps build up their database, is by collecting all the bits of geographic data on where people are. So you have to use that with a little bit of caution. I'd say use All Trails or Trail Forks or Strava along with a Northborough Trails Committee map, just to make sure, because a lot of these places are surrounded by private property, and we don't want to have any friction with landowners getting upset, like, why are these mountain bikers always going across my backyard? That kind of thing. We'd like to avoid that.
Right.
Well, I think that's it.
I know, I think we
Yeah.
have gone through all our questions, Bob. Is there anything else that you want to share? Like,
A couple points. One is I don't know if people appreciate the Community Preservation Act in town and what that, or even know about what it is and what it does. So that is a 1 or 2% surcharge on everybody's property taxes that goes into this fund that the town can use to build affordable housing and to acquire open space and also to maintain hiking trails. And that's where we come in. So over the years, we've sponsored probably 25 Eagle Scout projects, and Eagle Scout or Life Scouts, which is the step before Eagle, the Life Scouts love us because they don't have to do any fundraising. They have to come up with the project. Maybe it's a couple trail bridges that need to be built, or weed whacking and maintaining it has to be a fairly substantial project, not just clearing a quarter mile of trail, but like something that maybe 125 service hours to get an Eagle Award. But we finance that. We use Community Preservation Act money to buy material to build bridges, and that's true whether it's an Eagle Scout project or not. But that's super valuable to us because we do accept donations. We're part of the town, and I think consider it a nonprofit. But the Community Preservation Act has really been a godsend for us. It allows us to. We have a beautiful lawnmower that we use to cut grass on some of the trails that go through meadows, because what ends up happening on some of these meadow trails is you have maybe a 10-inch wide or 1 foot wide path that gets worn down, and then as the vegetation grows in from the side, it starts to encroach on the trail, and to the point where some people, if, say you've had Lyme disease, you don't want to get another tick on you, that might be a point where you come around a corner and you see a trail with a lot of vegetation hanging over it. You're not going to walk down that because you're probably going to get a tick on you. So we're able, with the Community Preservation Act, to buy equipment that we can use to cut back the tall grass. And sometimes, we can't get out there that much, so we couldn't buy just like a regular lawnmower. We needed something that can cut down grass that's 3 feet tall or 4 feet tall, but that we can also, it can't be a big tractor, because we might have to go down a little narrow trail to get to where this meadow
you have to
is.
go through like the woods. I was just thinking, you mentioned that. I was just thinking about the Cold Harbor Trail. So I enjoyed that trail for the very beginning part of it for many, many years with my dog. That's a great one if you have a dog, by the way. It's the Cold Harbor. So the Community Preservation Act really does help out the community. That small surcharge on our property tax goes right back to you through the Trails Committee, and in a way everybody can enjoy it. And then you've also talked about another volunteer opportunity. If somebody wanted to come and say, hey, I can help you maintain the trails, like, this is for all you honor students at the high school. I mean, the Trails Committee might be able to use your youth and your strength to help.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the Eagle Scout projects that we've done over the years have been very, very valuable, because really in all these projects, the materials, are a small percentage of what has to be done. It's really the labor, carrying the lumber a half mile or 3/4 of a mile into the woods with an air compressor and a nail gun and all that kind of to build these bridges. That so when you have a project like that and maybe 25 scouts show up, and then the mom and dads are there and they bring pizza and donuts and all that. It's like it's really fun. We build the bridges in the parking lot behind the police station sometimes, and then we'll load them onto trucks and drive them to the trails. So we have a couple different things in place. We've done things with the younger scouts, not necessarily for an Eagle Award, but the younger scouts need community service hours to get certain types of merit badges. So we'll say, hey, there's a trail. It's got a lot of pricker bushes grown over it. Why don't you go out with a few of your scout mates and cut back those pricker bushes and, record your hours. And I'll go check that you actually did it, and then I'll sign off on it. So that's the Community Preservation Act allows us to be able to do that. Because I remember when I was a scout, I never got to the point of being an Eagle Scout, but we had to, raise our own money do a car wash or, sell subs or something like that to try to raise money to then go build a bridge on a hiking trail. So, taking that out of the equation for the scouts, I think just makes things a whole lot easier. And then also on a more routine maintenance end, we have a couple chainsaws, we have a few lawnmowers, weed whackers, and things like that. And then we donate our time, and then we have this nice equipment that we can use to maintain things. And also, too, one of the nice things about keeping the meadows, like at Green Street, the former John Schunder.
DPW.
Yeah, he was a tree warden too, I think, in town. But when John passed away, the town was able to acquire close to 70 acres there. So it's Shunder's Meadow is where we have a nice trail. We don't mow that. There's a farmer who cuts that grass to feed his cows. I think he lives in Berlin. But we mow a path straight across the Shunder's field, and then there's hiking trails up in the woods. So we'll use our mower for doing that. We don't have to mow the aqueduct, thankfully, like I was saying,
right, yeah,
or Cold Harbor, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
So that's a flood control dam, and they DCR, Department of Conservation and Recreation, they mow that area. And also there's another part of the flood control dam. If you're driving on Route 20 going up towards Northborough Crossing, you might see this kind of nice little thing off to the right. That's also a DCR flood control dam. And that happens to be another sort of longish term project that the Trails Committee is interested in is on Davis Street. We've identified a parcel that DCR owns, and they're willing to let us put a parking lot in there. And then we would be able to walk on that. There'd be a place because right now people park along Route 20, but on that stretch of Route 20, cars are going like 50, 60 miles an hour.
On Davis Street or Otis Street?
Davis.
Davis.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you're going up Route 20, there's a stoplight at Davis and Route 20. If you kept going on Route 20, eventually you'd be up at Northborough Crossing. But if you made a right on Davis, almost like that would bring you towards where Yamazakura is, like the back of Yamazakura.
Okay.
And there's a wooded section that's like 3.4 acres or something. We don't even need that much space. We would just have maybe a little 50 by 100 foot parking lot with like a timber rail fence and a little trailhead kiosk put in there.
I know the area you're talking about.
And the nice thing about that, so Shrewsbury now has a trails committee, and if we can, that's called Hop Brook over there off of Davis and Route 20. When I have to be optimistic. When we get that open, we'll be able to walk up through the woods, up behind Northborough Crossing, and into Shrewsbury. So that's that connectivity thing again.
Even more connectivity. That is fabulous.
And so we'll be able to connect to the Shrewsbury Trail Network. So
and it's nice too for people who live in these neighborhoods to have a well-maintained trail literally in their backyard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the main motivation really is so the people in town have a place to go. They can get out and get exercise. Like I said, all of our trails are mountain bike accessible. And in the winter, you'd be really surprised how many snowshoe tracks and cross-country ski tracks I see.
I've snowshoed on the aqueduct.
Yeah,
it's really fun in the winter.
Yeah, so
because it's so open, it's warm, and it's a nice walk.
Yeah, even Shunder's Meadow, I've seen people they ski loops around the meadow in the winter. So yeah, it's great, to have that kind of opportunity and to get people outside and get them involved and talking to each other, like at the Cold Harbor, Kearney Park area. That's sort of the unofficial dog park of Northborough.
Well, that's a whole other thing, getting a dog park in town. Folks have tried that several times, and it's a tough one to get to come together.
We've identified some areas. There's a big grassy meadow at Kearney Park that we're thinking we could do it in. I forget what held that back. The Old Town Dump, which I thought we could do, but we can't because it's not capped properly. So you can still see bits and pieces of metal sticking up. So that might not be the best idea. But yeah, we're not giving up on that. I think, I'm not a dog owner, but if I was, I would love to have an off-leash area where I could let my dog go run around and even maybe have some, have it divided, a big dog, small dog thing, or,
a lot of communities have done that, and then you're right, that would work out great.
Yeah, and I think it would take a little pressure off of Kearney Park in particular, where there's a lot of dogs. Tragically, a dog died because it got sucked into that water siphon during a heavy rain. There was dogs frolicking in the water, and that pipe is 3 feet in diameter, so there was quite a bit of suction going through there, and it just pulled this little, I think it was like a St. Bernard puppy or something, pulled it right in, and it got stuck and drowned. So there's
that's so
fencing
sad.
up there now.
Yeah.
But that's kind of one of the things behind the leash law is, being able to keep your dog under control, not necessarily so it doesn't bite another dog or another human, but there's coyotes. There's this siphon, which I never in my wildest dreams would imagine would pull a dog in.
Exactly. All the more reason to have a dog park, which
Yes.
is safe and specific
Yeah,
for dogs to run in,
absolutely.
as opposed to these trails, because you never know. Like you said, a coyote, and some dogs, like all dogs are good dogs, but you never know sometimes what will spook your dog. So,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I agree that is really a dog park specifically for dogs to play in is much better than the trails. We do have a leash law in town. Keep
Yeah.
your dog on a leash.
Yeah. And
I never could take mine off leash.
it's
See
a
when
little
you come out?
outside of the scope of what we do, but we would support that. We've looked for parcels. We've tried to encourage the town to say, hey, put a dog park here, put a dog park there, and then some things get in the way. Oh, it's too close to the water, that kind of stuff. But yeah, we're on board with that, with that idea for sure.
Well, that sounds like it might be another committee or volunteer organization in town, and maybe even another podcast.
Right, possibly, yeah.
Is there anything else we'd like to say about the trails before we?
No, just our old expression is hike 'em, bike 'em, ski 'em. That's
I'm
that.
so glad we talked today, Bob. This was great, and I hope people out there listening go out and hike it and bike it and walk it and use it, ski it, use all your trails.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having
Thanks
me,
a lot,
and
Bob.
and thanks everyone in Northborough for supporting us.
Yeah. And we'll see you at Applefest.
Absolutely, come to the booth.
So, Katrina, we had a question come in for Doc Talk, and I thought I would ask it to you today so our listeners can know what's happening with Doc Taco.
Sure.
So, it's interesting to me that this came through today because we're talking about all this hiking through the forests and all the wetlands that we have here in Northborough, but Doc Taco McBeardface is a lizard, and he lives in the children's room in a terrarium. So how did we make a desert in a glass for Doc Taco? How does that happen?
That's a great question. So essentially, you need what all deserts have, right? Heat and rocks and shady places. So Dr. Taco, there are two different spots in a terrarium. Dr. Taco during the day likes the very arid temperatures of an Australian desert. So she basks on her rock at about 110 degrees during the day.
Wow.
Yeah, and we do have a cool side of the tank because, as you know, lizards regulate their temperature through external factors and not internal like mammals. So when she gets too hot, she can move to the other side of the tank, which hovers right around 75 degrees during the day. Although with the air conditioner, we have to keep an eye on it a little more. And then it's just a matter of, kind of deciding what features we want in there to keep it interesting for her, because, we could just put a rock and a food dish and call it good, but then, her poor little lizard heart would break. So we have a variety of things like a log, and we've got her food dish, and we've got a background. Baby dragons and juvenile bearded dragons cannot do sand because they could ingest it and it could get impacted in their system and they could get seriously injured. So as of now, we don't have that, but we are working with a Girl Scout troop in town to fund a larger terrarium. And I think when we get this larger terrarium, we'll be able to have some fun substrate for her. So she'll be able to dig, because when she goes into her brumation and her mating phases, female bearded dragons really appreciate that aspect of being able to dig into the sand.
And that will be exciting for everybody who comes and visits Doc Talk, because you can see her in all these little places within her terrarium.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. So we have a desert in a glass for our bearded dragon, Doc Talk.
Yes, we do.
Thanks, Katrina.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening, everybody, to this episode of Doc Talks News and Views. Remember, if you have a question for Doc Talk, you can email us at
podcast@northboroughlibrary.org.
And remember, the library is always here for you. We are open Monday, 12 to 8:30.
Tuesday and
Wednesday, 9:30 until 8:30 p.m. Thursday, Friday, Saturday from 9:30 to 5. Always open at northboroughlibrary.org. And you can find anything there. All our contact information is there. You could call us, 508-393-5025.
And all of our previous podcasts are on our website as well under our events tab.
That's right. And all of our emails are on there as well. So stop by.
Thanks for listening.